Hey everyone.
Hi.
This is Elicia Miller. I'm the founder of Core Emotional Healing, and I'm here with my husband and business partner,
Doug Miller. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a transpersonal psychologist, and specialize in men's work.
We do work together, and we have our own businesses. So I mainly work with women, and I'm transitioning also into training therapists and therapists and healers and practitioners and coaches in my core emotional healing model. We also do couples work, and we do retreats together. Doug has his own practice, and you specialize in
Men's work, general anxiety, depression, helping people come into their authentic selves, and the relationship between the psychological and spiritual.
So we do a lot of, our focus is on the core emotional wounding that results in a lot of the things that Doug just mentioned, the anxiety and depression that people experience. I specialize in how it shows up as chronic physical symptoms. We specialize in the source of relationship problems. And I've done a lot of videos on other symptoms such as eating disorders that I went through and addictions. And I was going to do my next Facebook Live video on my own objectification and sexual abuse that resulted in me objectifying my body and equating sex to love. And then this week, the whole movement came from Harvey Weinstein. And then this has been so wonderful to see everyone coming out and being vulnerable on Facebook and saying me too. And so it's been mostly women, and then there's also been men as well posting that they have experienced sexual harassment and sexual abuse in their life. A lot of vulnerable people are sharing about their abuse, and so it's coming out as a major issue that we feel is ready to be healed. And so when I saw this movement coming out, I knew we had a lot to offer in terms of the solutions and what we can do about it, what's really at the source of it.
Yeah, and just in addition to some of the vulnerability that was expressed, a lot of men really posted some really revealing and vulnerable things about how they've participated in mistreating women in so many different and subtle ways. I mean, I was really touched, and I really feel like something is shifting in the culture overall, at least for people who are already kind of awake and stepping into this kind of work. And I'll talk a little bit later about kind of the activism that we all can do to help this along, to help heal the culture as we heal ourselves.
So I'm just going to share it on my Facebook wall while you talk.
Okay, she can multitask really well. So to be really, really clear about where we're coming from, another thing I do, I'm not just a clinical or transpersonal psychologist. I've been a forensic psychologist. I do evaluations in the court context, and I've done thousands of evaluations. And one of the things that sometimes comes up with women, particularly in either custody or like the Department of Family and Children's Service cases, is sometimes women repeatedly get involved with abusive men or in abusive relationships of various kinds. And they often have like a codependent and masochistic pattern. And most people know what codependence is. It's a tendency to sacrifice self and to focus on the needs of the other person. And sometimes there's a kind of wish for help to heal the other person, to help them. And that's how they gain their self-esteem. And then the masochistic part of what I'm talking about is there's a acceptance of being mistreated and of not getting your needs met, putting yourself second, and even abused. So that's a pattern that sometimes comes up. And when I start talking about this, I mean, all my all my work, even the forensic work, and particularly the group of evaluations I do, is geared toward helping people. And what I'll often mention in those evaluations, I'll describe where these dynamics come from, and they often come from a history of abuse, and there's a recurrent pattern of abuse, and codependence, and maybe relationship with addicts or other abusive people. And I'll say, as I describe those dynamics, I'll say this is not to blame or the victim, but merely to point out the dynamics that contribute to the recurrent pattern. And you know, the good news in that is that what it does is it places the choice, once enough therapy work is done, once enough emotional healing is done, it takes the person out of the victim role. It shows how through their past that they've been participating passively and by giving over their power and their self-esteem. And Alicia's going to talk at length about those patterns. And that when they heal, the power is still with them. And once they heal, they can really make a choice, identify those patterns, identify the people who might mistreat and abuse them, and come into a place of empowerment. In addition, I also put in my evaluations that what I'm writing is not in any way to forgive the perpetrators. And that sometimes the other side of this is sometimes I'll have evaluations where people come up with sort of narcissistic patterns or antisocial and anger issues, and they can be abusive. And you know, oftentimes they're men, and sometimes they are women. And there, I recommend therapy. Often group therapy is really helpful, particularly with other angry and abusive people. And men's work. You know, there's a lot out there for men, and men need to take advantage of that. So with the narcissistic, antisocial, and angry type, often there's like a judgmental and shame-based self that then the shame is projected onto the codependent or the victim as blame, that then turns into shame again. And this kind of cycle continues, and that keeps the masochistic and codependent pattern going, because the codependent is kind of in a one down, and it keeps the narcissistic kind of feeling good about themselves. And if the codependent accepts that, then you get the whole pattern repeating over and over again. And Elicia is going to talk about
to summarize that,
which you're so good at doing.
So we're addressing the cause of both the perpetrators, the abusers, the harassers, and also the cause of patterns with victims. Now, and I'm very careful about saying that it's not blaming the victim, as Doug said. They are not creating this, consciously, but there is we can always trace it back to something that is repeating unconsciously for them. And I say for them because in my life experience, everything that I've been experiencing has been for me, even though it's been hard and traumatic and painful, and I experienced a lot of suffering and struggles with my body and symptoms and relationship patterns. And so I was learning from all of those. So this video is to help empower everyone to look deeper within your own patterns. If you are, if you're now just becoming more aware of, and we're gonna go over examples even for people who may be harassing and not even aware of it, or objectifying and not aware of it, and also for anyone who may be objectifying themselves and have maybe weak or boundaries that they're not aware of, where they are allowing things to happen. So,
as you mentioned that, it occurred to me that that some people may be asking, well, how is the abuser or the harasser not in power? Because you talked about everyone to be empowered, and one of the common features of both of these types, and if this whole dynamic, is a lack of self-love. True self-love, and that'll become clearer as we talk more. And I'll be mentioning shame in the abuser and in men in particular. Just a quick thing. Something that often comes up is that the question of women wanting to help men with their issues. And I see a really big role for a lot of women and our relationships. In the end, I really see this as us helping each other and everyone helping one another from the right place. Now, if you're a woman interested in helping a man and maybe you're already in a codependent or a relationship where you're not being treated well, you got to be really careful, because in general, I recommend that if a woman's going to help a man, she has to be really free of any codependency and have really good boundaries around taking care of herself and her emotions. And again, that's something we're going to address. And to be empowered, and
yeah. So taking responsibility for what you are allowing, even in your relationship.
Yeah, because even though I talked about women helping men, even the one they're in a relationship with, it can put some people at risk of being mistreated again. And just want to be careful about that and get support. But that's part of what this is about,
yes,
to introduce this issue. And one last thing, so we'll be talking about kind of abuse and mistreatment and codependent dynamics. And really harassment is kind of like the cultural manifestation, and kind of less harsh, but it can be harsh, but it's a cultural manifestation of these same dynamics and the kind of entitlement and things that can go on. So without further ado.
Okay. So when this Harvey Weinstein and Me Too movement came out, my first response was that there needs to be a new movement of more awareness around respect, like moving from objectifying people to respecting them. And that includes respecting ourselves. And that was like my first meme. So I'm going to share kind of the progression of what led us to this video. And then I said, okay, I'm going to participate. And I wrote, Me Too. Now let's talk about solutions. So I'm all about, being productive in life, like seeing what's happening and seeing the cause and what we can do about it. So my first solution that I posted on Facebook was something that I've experienced in my life that goes way back to my childhood, and something that I have processed from my childhood, and that goes back to objectifying women in my case. So the objectification of women was something that was happening in my household. So I felt objectified as well, and then I continued to objectify myself because of how I felt loved. And then there was things that I allowed in my relationships and ways that I was treated that was not respecting myself. And then when Doug and I got into a relationship, then there was a behavior.
Yeah, and I'll...
you're going to share about that. So...
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you want to share about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So... The behavior that she's talking about is that I would, while even we were together, if a woman who seemed attractive to me walked by, I would look at them and look at them way too long and felt like that was something that I had a right to do. And do you want to talk about that before I talk about where it came from?
So when Doug started to check out other women, then I put a boundary up. And the reason why I was able to say no to that, and it was very clear for me, was because I had done a lot of healing from my past in terms of what I was allowing that wasn't okay and where it came from. So I just want to reference that.
And when she says put a boundary up, is she would look at me and say, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And, and I'll talk about where it came from, but in my kind of... frankly, sort of entitled state, or as though that was okay, was like, what the heck? Like, I've never had any woman say that to me in this way, because the women I had been with were kind of like, you can look but don't touch.
Yeah. And so, I was surprised actually that he was with so many women that allowed that. And it didn't matter. All that mattered was how I felt. So eventually I shared that I didn't feel safe in our relationship when he was doing that. And then that's how it shifted. I asked for what I needed, and I was vulnerable around it instead of attacking him.
I'm curious. I never really asked you, was there a time earlier in your life when you were okay with that kind of behavior in the man you were with, or did it always trigger something in you?
So, the relationships I had, that never came up in the relationships. But outside of the relationships, I had no boundaries with my own sexuality. And so I was still objectifying myself. And so I was kind of sending off that energy where I needed to be desired. And I actually loved the attention because it made me feel loved. So it triggered my own objectification when you did that.
Right. And
it triggered, not feeling safe and not feeling really loved. And so that's how we shifted that.
Yeah, but for me as a man, I had to look at where these things came from. And as I thought back about, my father used to kind of stare at women walking down the street. I even remember him, when I was a kid, there would be like Playboy magazines and other magazines on the shelf, and he'd kind of wander off over there and start flipping through the magazines, So he did that kind of thing where he'd drive and look at a woman, and so there was this cultural conditioning for me with objectification. Then I had other women tell me, you can look but don't touch. And what we're addressing here is, treating women as kind of these playthings for men and as objects, and how that can play into abuse and how women have been mistreated themselves and harassed.
Yeah.
It's all part of that whole package.
Definitely. Let me also give an example of what that creates for children. So if a child is observing their father looking at other women and desiring other women, and they're with their mother, and the mother's allowing that, it sends a message, and I hear this from a lot of my clients, that they never felt good enough, and the only way they felt loved was to have that attention or to objectify themselves. And that's kind of where that can begin, and I experienced that as well. And if you're not getting the attention and the love you need, you get it whatever way you can, and that's kind of just a learned behavior.
Yeah, and my daughter, who's almost 23, I just talked about this with her the other day. It was the second time we talked about it before, and it really had an impact on her. And I was surprised, because probably less surprised than I would have been 4 or 5 years ago. But it really affected how she thought of herself as a woman and her self-value. And so this is kind of highlighting these kind of subtle things that really aren't so subtle or so unimportant that men do, that we take for granted or feel like it's okay.
That's such a great point of what you just brought up, of what it creates, even beyond objectifying ourselves or the way we feel loved. It can also create needing to look a certain way, if that was what maybe the father was giving attention to. Yeah. Like, you have to be really skinny and look like a model or someone in Playboy. And so a lot of times that's these subconscious messages that little girls get by observing this behavior.
So here I was dealing, I kind of remember the moment when she really got upset about it. And I was like, you're wrong like that. No, this is what I do. This is how I am. This is my right. And, men learn to feel some self-value and to grow in our independence. And it was like a challenge to that. It was like, you can't do this. And I'm like, but it's harmless. It's not, that was where my mind went, initially. So that kind of triggered my stuff around how I felt, how I learned to live, which is independent and to make my own decisions, and even absolutely entitlement. Like I was entitled to do that, even in relation to her. So I started asking, the real insights for me came when I started asking shortly after that, what was I getting out of it? Why was I doing this? What was in it for me? And the two things I came up with were like a little bit of ego thing, where maybe if I got to look back, or like I could do this thing and look at these women, and then the second thing is just the only way I could describe it is like this really cheap thrill, this like ridiculous little, this attractive woman, shiny object kind of thing, and so really when I thought about it, I got like nothing out of it, nothing of value. And then what was the cost? And I was hurting, the woman I loved who had done enough work to get really clear about her boundaries and what's important. And what I realized I was doing is I was giving up relationship for like this independence and this thing that just was about ego and about some little meaningless buzz or something. And, I say these things because I want guys to start considering what that's about. Any guys that engage in that behavior. I know there's a lot of men that don't, and some guys even were like, "You did that?" I was like, "Oh my God, I did that," And sure, I felt ashamed about it, and that was okay. I'll talk more about shame later, but
yeah. So that's the first solution is to really look at behaviors that are contributing to objectification and harassment, and even the objectification of ourselves and where that comes from. And so that's what we're kind of just bringing up to look at, and it is the women's responsibility, and it can go both ways, and same-sex couples. So I'm just gonna share from our point of view right now, but to speak up for what's not okay. And like Doug said, I had done a lot of work to finally get clear with my own personal boundaries. So let me give you an example of what it would look like if someone, like for instance, if someone is allowing that behavior and they're saying, it's okay, you can look. That was kind of my point. I'm like, that's the first solution, is to not allow your partner to look and to gawk. That was actually what I wrote. Like, gawking is so disrespectful, and it feels disgusting to the person getting gawked at. And so I just remembered always seeing couples together, and if a guy in a couple, partnership, marriage, whatever, even dating, would check me out, I would feel so disgusted, and I would feel bad for the disrespect, that I was a part of this disrespect, that I was, feeling, and feeling what was happening in that. So to really get clear with this dynamic, because if you don't, and if you are still saying you can look but don't touch, then that could set you up for this behavior of men that you feel kind of victimized, that they are pigs and perverts, and they just do whatever they want, and that you have to take responsibility for what you are allowing if you're in a relationship, and if you find yourself complaining about those things.
Yeah. And, my ultimate conclusion kind of from just in the past 24 hours, is very intense watching everyone go through this. But it's something that I've come to before, is that Elicia mentioned it's the woman's responsibility to say it's not okay.
As well.
But it's the man's responsibility to listen. Mm-hmm. If these things get pointed out, as they get pointed out. And I had that whole package of like, oh my God, I'm doing something that hurt you. And that immediately was like the shame response, and I couldn't hear it. And I had to slow myself down, and then I had to go into like basically like a psychological self-inquiry and ask, what is this? What was it about for me? So I tried to take responsibility too. I tried to understand it, and really even the past 24 hours has added to all of that kind of understanding, and it's all in our awareness now. And so like I kind of appreciate you saying it's a woman's responsibility.
Oh, I was just saying as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying
to be
that.
honest about your feelings.
Yeah, yes.
And really, that's like a mark of, that's what self-love is. And then loving someone is listening to what helps them feel good, and what helps them and what hurts them to feel bad, and to take some responsibility and make the shift because you love them.
Yeah.
And because you know, and in the end, it's like, and I know men ask this all the time, and especially awake or aware men, in different ways ask, you know, what kind of man do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be on the planet? And that helps to kind of inform and helps one take responsibility in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to continue to speak from what women can do from an empowered place.
Yeah, and I'm going to continue to speak what men can do from what, in the end, is actually an empowered place.
Yeah.
And it may feel like you're giving up some independence, but that independence isn't really, was conditioned. And we'll talk more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the second solution is to, for women, or even men, so I mean it can go for both sexes, but I'm going to continue to speak from my own personal experience, is to address how you feel and how maybe you felt loved and if it's still playing out. So in my past, I felt loved, as I shared in the beginning, from being desired and having sex. And as long as I was desired sexually, then I felt loved. That was kind of my value. And I was validated, you know, as long as I was desired. So that contributed to me having really poor boundaries sexually and what I was allowing. And so I was also giving off that energy of needing to be desired. And I noticed that since I did my own healing work around that aspect and healed, you know, why I didn't feel loved and processed a lot of my repressed emotions around that and my repressed anger around all my objectification and feeling used and violated and betrayed by men, and not really being loved, but just feeling used, then I was able to give myself the love that I needed. And that dynamic changed, and I started to respect myself and my body, and I then was more aligned with myself and my self-worth, and then pulled that energy back. And I noticed that I wasn't getting the attention or the harassment and kind of that type of energy anymore. So yeah, and then I met Doug, who loved me for me. After that, and we went through our own healing around, as we shared with that, but also just feeling, you know, safe and loved no matter what, and then that kind of processed out for me of how I use sex and not needing to have sex. And so,
it was, you know, in general, I think our relationship, we had both come to a certain place in our healing. And then in the consciousn't of the relationship, we kind of finished and are still finishing some of the healings that we needed. But without the base of the kind of initial self-love and the initial kind of core healing, like it kind of gets you 60% there, and then you can enter into a relationship and heal more with a conscious partner. So that's kind of an aside. But regarding that, one of the early things that happened in our relationship is Elicia sent me to the Center for Inner Knowing, which is, there's some really gifted healers
there's
there.
Soha now.
Soha, yeah. What's SOHA stand for?
The School of Humanity and Awareness.
And I took it. It was really great for me. I've done a lot of experiential work and did more there. But in any case, one of the kind of leader who knew Elicia very well, like, it was a very powerful weekend. But she like caught me dead in her stare and was like, let Elicia know what it really means to be loved for who she is. And you know, I'm kind of get chills when I think of that. And because Elicia still had some of that attentional and sexual kind of mistaking for true love, like she was being loved for how she looked, or for sexuality, and feeling loved mainly through sexuality. And it was interesting because it was a play of certainly sort of enjoying her sex life, but also letting her know that there was this genuine love for who she is as a person. And this is more of a deeper kind of intimacy issue that is about how we love and how we want to be loved and how we truly want to be loved, and how objectification, harassment, and all the stuff, or how I used to gawk at other women, actually fed the dysfunctional pattern of love, and can create these cycles and relationships ongoing without the awareness. And unfortunately, you know, of course, we broke out of that. And
we had to go through a period of where we had to make sure that I didn't need to do anything, or I felt like truly loved and respected to be sexual in different ways. And after that initial healing period, then the freedom of our sexuality was able to really come out with no triggers. So the triggers would come up from any of that old stuff of feeling used and or needing to look a certain way. I've had some crazy experiences with men objectifying me, which came from, you know, me being objectified and abused as a child. So I'm going to continue to stress that there is a source of this. If you know you're experiencing it and you continue to experience it, there's something within you to address this pattern, where it comes from, and then processing it out to stand up for yourself, and then that will create and restore your boundaries. So, you know, I went through that process, which helped me, you know, finally get the love I always wanted, and then we had to go through this healing, as we were just sharing, still from all the pain and of the objectification. So it's such a gift to be with a partner who is holding that space of love and safety and respect.
And it's not like I didn't have anything to learn either.
Yeah.
And it was through a process of communication, doing it wrong sometimes, and listening and hanging in there through it, and trying to do right, you know, to not to engage in the stuff that wasn't really right. And I wanted to love well, and I wanted to be in a loving relationship, and that was true and genuine, and that helped motivate it. Now, just real quick, I want to go over a couple things that men might say to themselves, or how men can think about objectification also. I know we've talked a lot about it, but it's a really important issue because it's so pandemic in our culture. And you know, do you look at your woman as arm candy? Do you look at her as a sex object? Do you look at her as a house cleaner? How much are you engaging in pornography? And how is that coloring and interfering with the intimacy and the real connection during lovemaking that might otherwise occur? On a deeper level, what's this question, and this is not something to be answered really quickly most of the time. Now, a lot of aware men and know the answer is what's really going to fulfill you in a relationship. And later on, I'm going to talk about some of the things that take men away from really knowing what the true answer to that is. Again, the question is, what's really going to fulfill you in a relationship, in your heart of hearts, in what you really want deep inside. And then another question that I want to ask men, because we're kind of jumping ahead, but it's how do you manage your own feelings? Do you primarily experience sort of anger and sex? Are you two primary emotional modes? What other things? How have you learned to deal with your feelings, or have you? Because most men are not taught to, and we're in fact get kind of our feelings beat out. But I'm going to talk about that later.
So that's a big general solution for both men and women, is to go into a process where you can access your feelings again.
Yeah.
So, and this is what we're talking about, of like, maybe you're shut down, as men, and also shut down as women. Our voices were shut down. Our, all these things have, so we don't even know how we feel. And that's why it's so hard to respond in the moment, if we're getting kind of harassed and we haven't really accessed our true power and our voice and anger from the past. We can be shut down and not say what we need to say to stop what is happening. So that's coming into our next point, which is restoring your personal boundaries. What's that?
Yeah.
What were you want me to?
No, we'll get to it.
Okay. So and so you want to talk about?
I think that's yours.
Well, I just said all of that.
Okay. So, I think a question is, I, as a man interacting with a woman who may have been trained to sacrifice herself, or if you're in any kind of relationship and you're the one who's doing the sacrificing, the question for the other partner is to look and see how your partner may be giving up their wants and needs. Because what ends up happening is it's almost like that person, part of them isn't there. They're not the codependent, the person who is always accommodating the other person, isn't really meeting. We all want to be met, and with the codependent, it's kind of like, I'm there for you, but then when you come back and want to get met, they're not in touch with their own feelings because they're sacrificing their own feelings so much. The ways that men can take advantage of that is maybe by satisfying their own sexual needs or not being considerate of their partner's needs. It could be not dealing with their own emotions, not dealing with their own feelings, and having the woman kind of be the receptacle or the accommodator while the man doesn't really take care of the woman's emotions. It can also, the worst boundary violation perhaps is anything to do with violence. And so if a woman's like putting up with anger and, or even physical violence, man needs to get help around those issues and to take responsibility for their emotional life. And this is where we keep going back to that, because this is the core of it all. This helps resolve all of this stuff. So
let's define what boundary violation is.
Yeah, okay. I think that was missing.
Yeah. So one of the solutions is to make sure that you restore your boundaries and you have healthy personal boundaries. What that means is there is a need to go back to when your personal boundaries were broken. So I posted on Facebook yesterday that I was reflecting on when I had really bad, poor to no boundaries, personal boundaries. I just allowed anything, and I couldn't really feel or speak up for what I needed or say no, and I was just putting up with a lot of disrespect and things like that. So it's not as simple as just saying the woman has poor, and I'm not blaming anyone for having poor personal boundaries. It wasn't my fault that I had poor personal boundaries, but it was my responsibility to go back to when my boundaries were broken, to restore them, to then set healthy boundaries for myself in the present. So let's then now talk about boundaries are broken typically as children from any type of abuse. So verbal abuse, calling kids names, calling them stupid, shaming them. I hear just the worst stories, working with the work that I do, covering abuse, but in terms of verbal and then also physical and sexual and emotional.
Even inappropriate touching or excessive touching, or even not enough touching, or
ignoring the kid is another boundary violation.
Can you explain them?
Yeah. So if a child has needs, or they're asking for something, or they're feeling something, if they're being ignored, it's violating their personal boundaries and taking care of them. So a parent's role is to make sure their kids feel loved and safe. And so if a child is asking for something or feeling a certain way, their boundaries getting broken because they're not feeling safe. So any type of an environment that doesn't feel safe to the child. So if parents are arguing all the time, if there's physical abuse with the parents, that's a boundary violation with the child. There's so many examples of how our boundaries are broken.
I want to speak to neglect and emotional neglect. If and so many of our parents weren't real good at taking care of our emotional needs, and if that's the case, what ends up happening is the child is, and particularly for men, for a variety of reasons, we don't even know what our feelings are. So we don't even know how to say, that's not okay, or that is okay. This is what I want, that isn't what I want. So there becomes just this kind of open field, lack of boundaries of needs and wants that don't get met, and things get crossed, and the man doesn't even know it, and that can frustrate the partner at times if she's doing things that is actually not good for the man, but the man doesn't even know it.
So
can you clarify that?
Well, I was talking about boundaries as children that were.
Yeah. But what the boundary, the thing that happens in childhood is that the child doesn't get in touch with what their actual true feelings are. Yeah. What they do want, what they don't want. So the
boundary is the neglect of the child's feelings, or the shaming of the child's feelings. So that's a boundary violation of the child. That then sets them up to being disconnected from their feelings. That then creates
disconnection in relationship. Yeah.
In what's good for them and what they want, and speaking up, and also the boundary violation of someone else's space, and the abuse continues. So if a child is, I'm going to give my example, my childhood, my dad was verbally abusive, and my mom didn't say anything. So I was standing up for all of us, and I was really angry about it and trying to get him to stop, but no one listened to me. So there was a couple boundary violations there. My father was violating my boundaries, and it felt really unsafe, and it was abusive. And then also my mom wasn't standing up for us, so that was also a lack of protection is a boundary violation. And I wasn't being listened to, and then I was being made wrong. So that's another violation. So what that did for me is I was shut down, and I didn't have a voice, and I wasn't connected to my feelings, and then that modeled this behavior that I accepted in my relationships. So then I allowed men to lie to me, abuse me, disrespect me, because that was the pattern that was modeled to me. That's what love was for me. That's what it was modeled. So so then that created, all of these abusive situations and harassing and violations to me, until I finally said, what is making me choose all of these men? And that was, my first awakening in terms of looking within myself and taking responsibility for this pattern. So that's really what's needed in both cases for the abuser and for the victim, of like to move away from men are, like I didn't say, men are fucked up, they're abusive, they're this and this. I said, what's making me choose this? What is going on where I continue to attract and choose and allow this to happen to me? So it took me a whole process to access my anger and stand up for myself as a child. And that's going to the source of the pattern to then restore my boundaries, like to say, this is not okay. And then that restored my self-worth. And then I felt loved and empowered for the first time, where I started making better decisions. But it was easier because I could feel finally what wasn't okay after I did my own emotional process.
Mm-hmm. And a pattern where, in this case, a woman does engage in a lot of anger toward men, I view that as a phase of healing that is necessary for some women. If it goes on and on, then I think at some point a woman has to look inside and see where that anger is coming from and what the original violation was, to reach some kind of balance in herself to actually enter into full empowerment that isn't based in anger. Mm-hmm. Now, the anger is very protective, and it's, like I said, it can be unnecessary. And in therapy work, the anger expression is essential in most all the work
and
that we do.
That's what restores boundaries,
right?
And it shifts the pattern. It actually says, I'm not allowing this is not okay anymore. And then the pattern shifts.
In therapy, the anger is directed toward the source. It's
right.
not projected to all men and to all of society and to all. Not that there's not plenty of things to be angry about.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we had another video on anger, so you can watch that.
One.
Yeah, anger is a great, a beneficial, healthy emotion in response to abuse. So once you do restore your boundaries and you have access to your anger again, so when you are not accessing your repressed anger and you are still stuck and feeling kind of powerless from abuse from the past, it's that natural response that comes up or that should come up in abusive or disrespectful and harassing situations. You don't have access to that. So that's another benefit of doing that therapeutic anger processing to express your anger from the past. So it then arises naturally when you are getting disrespected in the present. So that's what were you gonna?
In terms of the image of like a woman walking down the street and a woman who's empowered and has worked through some of these issues and frankly I feel like I can see the difference. A woman who has processed some of her things and is in an empowered state, holds herself in a certain way, moves in a different way than someone who's kind of folded in and meek and at risk. And it's an awful thing to speak about, but it's just kind of this reality that it's kind of this predator-prey thing. And, there's this long held understanding in the codependency and the alcoholic community in 12-step programs that, if there's 300 people in a room and there's one codependent and one alcoholic, they're going to be like drawn to each other. Or narcissist, like a magnet, and there's just this like energetic and that aspect of things that
someone who's powerless and someone's overpowering.
And so the healing can shift all of that on both sides, and I just wanted to address that as well, where the anger does help produce that kind of shift in the victim mentality.
Mm-hmm. And I do, we practice this in our lives of, things do keep showing up, for us to help us work it out. So I want to stress that it's that we're not to blame, and we still need to address the abuse and just, to process it. And we will attract situations until we do that, until we process the source, until we stand up for ourselves, until we work out this emotional pattern.
Yeah, and it's not to say that, and again, this is in no way to blame any victim, because no one should be victimized. And there are predators that anyone can fall victim to, and but this is kind of like the extra kind of armor that can help in other situations where there may be some vulnerability, or there may be someone who's going to look for the weak person, and so to speak. That's just how it works, and it's sad. And again, that's what this video, we're hoping it's going to help shift something, and as part of this whole movement that's going on, and we're trying to provide a different level of understanding to it.
Yeah.
Did you do that? So Elicia kind of ended by talking about this like recurrent pattern, and I mentioned early on when I was talking about the psychological evaluations that when you see this kind of recurrent pattern of abusive relationships, and I know we've all known someone that just seems to get with the wrong people, get abused, gets mistreated, or addicts and alcoholics over and over and over again. And Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychology, talked about the repetition compulsion, and what that was the person would put themselves in situations like they experienced with their parents in childhood, out of an unconscious attempt to try to get the healthy resolution with the parent. So you'd find a partner who maybe abused you like a parent, or neglected you like a parent, and the goal unconsciously was to win their love over. So that's where that pattern comes from. And you've heard the expression, married a man like dad, or married a woman like mom. It's where this kind of compulsion comes from, to try to get that healthy resolution from what was really an impossible situation as a child.
Yeah, and so the two ways that people look at that is, some people make these conclusions about men, and also about themselves, like, I'm never going to be loved, I'm not lovable, all men are assholes, and
That's a great example, just real quick, of a limiting belief that comes into play and determines your life. You come to believe that that's true, and then that's what you start experiencing, and that's that kind of energetic attraction that we were talking about earlier.
And then the other way is what we've been sharing about seeing that as the pattern that wants to be worked out, that it's time for you to learn these lessons, to learn how to love yourself, to learn how to access your anger, and to which is really your power, and to have access to your full emotions and your feelings and your intuition. And from that place is when you can stand up and set healthy boundaries. And I really want to emphasize boundaries as a huge, big part of this solution. And the boundaries comes from doing this healing work from the past. I'm going to stress that, because it's very difficult to say what you want to say and stand up for yourself when you still have this fear of the child, of being abandoned and losing love, and it wasn't safe to express yourself. And so that's what needs to be addressed in order to feel safe to express yourself now and to ask for what you want. Like I did with Doug, that we shared in the beginning, of no, this is not okay for me. This is not okay, because I felt safe asking. It didn't risk anything for me. All it did was gain, getting my needs met. So I had access to all that from that work.
And there's three general kinds of boundaries. One are mainly we've been talking about kind of the porous boundary, where there aren't any real boundaries. There can also be in response to a neglectful childhood and other emotional wounds. There can be rigid boundaries. That's where you don't let anything in, where you don't risk anything, where you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable. And then in really the healthy boundaries are kind of partially porous, and they're also fluid, that you can put up a firm boundary if something's threatening or negative, and when you're in your greatest intimacy, there's almost no boundaries, and the kind of unity with your mate, or with someone that you trust and someone you love. So just to give
there's boundaries still.
Yeah, but relatively speaking,
yeah.
as you put down your defenses, you open up.
Yeah. So we're almost at an hour, so we could probably say what we need to do to wrap it up.
Okay.
So let's see if there's any questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to share? Or just summarize?
Just in terms of, I was going to go over kind of how men, some of the things that happen to men, but there's enough of that out there and on various sites. Yesterday I did find a great article of things that men can do. And it was written by a woman, and you can find her on Facebook. She got 40,000 shares on her post, and it's things that men can do to help with harassment and sexism and abuse of women. And I really like, the article starts like this: my timeline is full of decent men asking, how can I help? So there's so many men out there that want to and that want to do that. I just want to run down a few. She had about 16 or 18. One thing is, like, if you see something, or a buddy or a person, any other man is saying something negative or behaving negatively, say that's not cool, or that's a crappy thing to say. That could be peers, strangers, or it could be relatives. You know, that old uncle that is inappropriate, or anything like that. Boost female voices. That could be in writing. It can be at work. One of the things that struck me recently is how much I hear about in kind of some corporate cultures that women are still treated, you know, I'm not in corporate culture, I never have been, are still treated kind of secondarily. And one of the things that occurred to me is maybe men, that's a place of kind of competition and dominance, and so men kind of look at each other as the competitors, and women end up getting mistreated in that situation. You know, if this happens with someone you're close to, or even any woman that you know, and the man is ignoring her, for example, say, did you hear what she said? Did you, you know, what, like, point it out that you just ignored this person? Then and listen. It's about, like, listening. Like, guys, listen to women. Listen. Nicole also mentioned seek enthusiastic consent in your sexual encounters. Seek enthusiastic consent during sexual encounters.
Yes.
So if a woman,
okay.
if a woman checks out,
yeah.
and she actually gave these examples, I just thought this was a really sensitive thing, because it's like, what are you supposed to wait for a woman to say no? I mean, because you know,
and men. So this is
yeah, men too.
Same sex.
It goes both ways.
Well.
It goes same sex, and women can be aggressive too with men, and
totally.
men have talked about that.
Yeah.
More generally, it goes men and younger men,
and same sex.
And same sex, both. But these are the signs that maybe your partner's not as into it, and maybe you want to stop and establish the intimacy. Or even if you're just dating, I mean, do you want to be the kind of person that imposes yourself on someone who's actually kind of not there, kind of not into it, but is going along with it?
Sleeping?
Because a lot of...
that happens.
A lot of... With who?
People will start taking advantage of people if they're sleeping,
or if they're drugged,
or unconscious. Yeah.
I just wondered, did you pass?
Anyway. No.
So if there's a lack of reciprocation in the actions, if your partner gets quiet, if they seem stiff or tense, if they avoid making eye contact, if there's pauses or the tempo slows down, you know, think about. Nicole says stop and think about what you're doing. And on the women's side, sometimes, you know, and this can go back to, like, having porous boundaries. Say stop, or say I'm not comfortable with that, or maybe another time, or I'm just uncomfortable. And it's okay to voice that. And men need to learn to contain that sexuality and do it in a healthy. And you know, I mean, unless you feel like you're in some kind of physically very threat. I mean, I can't even imagine that kind of situation. I don't even know how to talk about it right in this context.
And there can be a freeze response. So this is important.
That's really important for men to tune into.
Yeah. So women who have had any trauma,
sexual trauma in
or
particular,
you know, any abuse, they one response to that is to freeze. So if there's any threat, that freeze response will come back. It's a trigger. So that can prevent a person to speak up and say, no, I don't want to. They may just be frozen in that threat. So yeah, that's something to pay attention to. If you feel that someone's frozen, and also if you have a freeze response, it's something to explore with a professional.
And not to be ashamed of.
What the source of that
to
is.
express, oh, I'm freezing, and something's coming up. And I mean, unless a guy's really messed up in the head, you know, he's going to be responsive to you. And it's okay to expect that. And if it doesn't happen, you know, get firmer, get stronger. It's okay.
You can also say, I don't feel safe.
Yeah.
That's kind of a way to describe the freeze. I don't feel safe.
I have two things to finish up on.
Yep.
As usual. One is, you know, one of the things we're talking about.
Hold on. And you will post the link to that.
Yeah. To Nicole Stamp. Her name's Nicole Stamp. She's on Facebook, and we'll post it here. We're talking about, there's two things that I'd like to finish up on. One, we're talking about, you know, maybe activism. It's kind of being active for yourself, being active for your own feelings. And this is the kind of work I do with men who are, you know, seem empowered on the outside, but maybe not in terms of their vulnerability and their emotionality on the inside. And in terms of society, standing up for one another. And one of the things that that kind of hurts me is when I see really great men and really great women kind of end up going at it because, you know, on Facebook mainly, because there's like this polarization happens, or there's like one thing is said and it's taken the wrong way. And it's like, let's try to have more compassion, because, you know, like that saying, we're trying to walk each other home. And you know, if a person does get angry, there's a reason for that, and it may not be you. You know, they may have been triggered by something that has to do in their past, male or female. And for men, it's often feeling ashamed, you know, and for women, it may be a history of abuse, of being treated in a certain way. But so the activism in this is this compassion, this understanding, this, you know, life can be really hard, very confusing at times, and you know, in a way, Facebook is this blessing where we're able. I mean, we're here doing this right now, and where we can all start sharing this stuff. And I mean, yesterday was a miracle. You know, yesterday was fantastic. Love you all too. Thank you. And this is so from my heart, and really, there's so many beautiful people, and men and women, and we're all working, man. Let's join together. Let's be a force together. This isn't men versus women. You know, this is humanity. This is people wanting to be loved, and love yourself first. Be most compassionate to yourself, and bring that compassion to others.
That's brilliant, and it's so true, to be your own activist, and this is, you know, your own activist within is to start paying attention to what is going on, what is being triggered, what patterns are happening in your life. Where do you find it hard to speak up, and what doesn't feel good, but you feel a threat. So start to notice those things.
Right. The fear.
Yeah. And then get professional help to address the source. And we all need support. We all need to get help because we're operating. These things are happening unconsciously. So we need help to get to the source of it, because we can't see it ourselves. If we could, we would have already addressed them. So Doug and I do have, you could start getting to the source of it in Thailand with us. We have our core emotional healing retreat December 1st through 6th, 2017, this year, very soon, like a month. And we do sessions online, couples and individuals as well, and various other programs. So get in touch with us if you want to just explore what's going on, if anything, you know, if you connected to anything in this video that you feel ready to address, so we can all, you know, move forward with this and start healing the source of it.
Yeah, we also once a month we do a radio show called the Intimacy Hour on is it United Intentions?
Yep,
No,
radio.
Radio.
So on the podcast app, you can find it on United Intentions Radio.
Yeah.
And we have a show actually this Thursday in 2 days on how getting the right support can heal your body. So, and actually your relationships start to heal as a result as well. And patterns, like, we shared today. So.
Anyway, much love.
We love you,
to everyone,
yeah.
and have compassion again, with each other and
Yeah.
with yourself.
Thanks for stressing that. See what's being triggered and where you need to, stand up or explore, with kindness. Love you.